This is the School Success Podcast, a podcast for school leaders to learn from other school leaders what's working and what's not, and to get inspiration and encouragement, as well as strategies to grow school enrollment, connect with families, retain teachers, recruit teachers, and everything in between. You guys are heroes, and I cannot thank you enough for pouring into this next generation that's coming behind us. My goal is you will take at least one thing away from every episode that you can take back to your school to make it better than it is right now. Please enjoy the School Success Podcast. Hey, School Success Makers. Welcome to another edition of the School Success Podcast. I'm your host, Mitchell Slater. I'm joined by a new friend out of Gilbert, Arizona, Jack Preus, who is the Executive Director of Soaring Education Services, and they are doing some awesome things. I got connected with him months back, and we've been trying for a while to get connected for a podcast because I knew he had some awesome things that he wanted to share with our amazing listeners, and we finally made it happen, guys. So we're going to dive into today's episode, but before we do that, we do want to highlight our amazing sponsors over at America's Christian Credit Union. They have been celebrating 65 years of service this year. And guys, you've heard the spiel, okay? They're providing essential school banking services, tuition financing programs for schools who are looking to reduce their risk and financial burden. And you guys can find out more about that on their website, which is americaschristiancu.com/schools. That's americaschristiancu.com/schools. And as you guys have heard before, this is where you can offer tuition financing loans to your families who maybe aren't able to pay the full upfront tuition in one payment, but you don't want to be on the hook to have to call people all year round trying to get the payments. You could have them do the financing loan through the credit union, and then you get your money up front as a school, and you don't have to worry about it anymore. How cool would that be? So go check them out. It doesn't cost your school anything. So go visit their website over there. All right. Well, as we jump in, I always like to pass it off to my guests to introduce themselves. So, Jack, welcome to the podcast today, sir.
No, Mitchell, thank you so much. Great to be with you. And it's been a long time coming. I've been really looking forward to this, and greetings from the desert here in Arizona.
Love it. Well, I always start with the same question. And because I love Arizona, I don't think I've been to Gilbert, Arizona, but I did have a friend that used to live there way back in the day. But if I was to come visit Gilbert, Arizona, you would say, Mitchell, you have to do this to get the full Gilbert, Arizona experience.
Well, if you're coming to Gilbert, Arizona in July, you just go basically straight to the pool. There's nowhere else to go. Get yourself wet so you can stay cool. But if you're coming during some of the better times of the year, in the winter and the spring and the fall, you know, Gilbert's full of incredible hiking trails. You've got great food in Gilbert, great community, lots of outdoor activities. It's an outdoor paradise during the cooler months of the year. So those are some of the things I would do, right, if I was visiting Gilbert, Arizona from out of state.
All right. And if we were to check right now, we're recording this July 5th. Right now, what is the temperature, the current temp outside for you guys there?
I haven't checked. I think we're going to be about 110 today. So about 110 degrees.
Jeez.
Yeah.
That's great. We had a 4th of July party yesterday with our small group from church came over, and our area never issues a heat index. We're in South Florida, but like by the coast, so there's like air breeze coming through. We got a heat index. So they said it was gonna be like 110 that day with the heat index. And I was like, we've never even gotten a warning like that. So it was hot yesterday, but just gotta stay cool, AC or pool or whatever it is. So 100, man, that's a hot day.
Yes,
but it's
sir.
a dry heat, as everybody in Arizona says, right?
Once you get north of 105, it doesn't matter anymore in my book. Dry, wet, okay, you're just not going outside.
It's the same difference on the opposite spectrum. So I grew up in Alaska, and people say like after -10, it's just cold. And I'm like, I would partially agree. Like it's just ridiculous. Like you don't want to be outside and too long, or it's gonna hurt. So I could see opposite effect, I guess. Well, as we jump into today's episode, and give me a little bit of background on you and how you got to where you are today before we jump into kind of the main 3 questions that we talk about on the podcast. So let's hear the background on Jack.
Yeah, thanks. So before moving to Arizona, I was out in California working in K-12 Christian education. I was a teacher and a coach and administrator for many years in the Lutheran school system. And it was around 2008 or 2009, I became sort of more, I would say, frustrated with the lack of accessibility that I was just becoming more aware with, that most kids in America, most families just didn't have access to great high quality educational options for their kids. The schools I was working at were primarily serving, parents and families who could afford private education. And then, becoming more aware that there were 50 million kids in America who couldn't afford to go to those types of schools, I was sort of frustrated. And in that search, I went back to school. I got an advanced degree. And I met at the time Andrew Newman, who was the CEO of a little tiny outfit out of Wisconsin that was going back into urban education, the urban core in places like Milwaukee and St. Louis and Phoenix. And they were opening up really radical new delivery models for kids. And they were running private schools using voucher funds in Wisconsin. They were running charter schools in Arizona with a Christian before and after care program, really dynamic ways of creating opportunities for families to access what we call a full and lasting education, which encompasses faith, character, and academics. Fast forward a few years, in 2014, my wife Anna and our 3 kiddos, 2 at the time, we have 1 Arizona baby, we joined the organization called Open Sky Education. So we moved to Arizona as part of that shift. And since then, I've been, for the last 9 years, serving at Open Sky in various capacities. I was a National Director of People Development, which is sort of my background, and teacher training and development. Worked on a number of research and development projects, one of which was this idea of micro schools. So I started researching small, tiny, flexible learning models back in, I would say, 2015. And then when COVID hit, it became evident that, the demand that we were seeing from parents was exploding and new forms of delivery were needed. So our team at Open Sky, our board, agreed to launch a new division of Open Sky Education called Soaring Education Services. So Soaring is a kind of a startup org that sits underneath Open Sky, a bigger, more established 20-year nonprofit that is really aimed at our specific mission, is to help catalyze and create new seats in Christian education, make Christian education affordable and accessible for all. So there's this sort of full circle experience for me, going back to that frustration I experienced in 2008, right? Now I get to lead an organization or a team that's really aimed specifically at how do we now do that? How do we make Christian ed affordable and accessible for more kids around the country? So here today, our team helps we come alongside churches, we come alongside individual operators of schools. We help people launch, design, and build new schools. And now we're moving into once those schools up and running, right, we are helping them maintain them, create sustainable operations, and again, not just create new seats, but now trying to help them sustain those seats in the long term as well. So we've been really excited about the progress thus far, and certainly looking forward to the future ahead as well.
That's exciting, and congrats on the new venture that you guys are jumping into. And I love how it's come full circle for you, like you mentioned, of how you were frustrated, and now you're able to, like, when you saw how kids could get into schools or afford it, and so now you're kind of coming in and assisting that. So obviously, with what you're doing, you've already come across schools that are obviously up against challenges. And so I kind of perfect segue into that first section we talk about, like what are you seeing schools typically struggling with? Is there a few that you would pick out of the bunch? I'm sure there's a lot, but what are some of the things you see continuing to pop up for schools that are struggling? But how are you guys helping them combat those, or how do you see these schools that are combating these struggles they're having?
Yeah, forgive me. There's a little bit of a history, I think, lesson here too for us, where I think the struggles or challenges that many schools are facing are really connected to these macro shifts that we're experiencing in education, right? You go back to 1990, there were 2 forms of delivery: public schools and private schools. Basically, homeschooling was almost non-existent, right, in most states in 1990. But you fast forward, 20 plus years now, 30 plus years, excuse me, we've had something in the neighborhood of 8 to 10 million seats move from primarily public education to now charters and micro schools and voucher schools, and this whole new ecosystem of models. And that's put a lot of pressure on kind of those incumbent systems, right? So the traditional private schools, I use them as an example because that's kind of my wheelhouse, right? Those that sort of were born out of that late 20th century, right, model have been under a lot of pressure and duress, right? They went through enrollment struggles kind of earlier this century with the depression that we went through, right? The downturn, the economic downturn. They got a rebound during COVID, but many of those challenges still exist, right? And it really comes down to this. I think the big shift that we're experiencing is parents want more matching forms of educational delivery for their kids, right? They don't want in larger numbers every year. More and more families are saying, I don't want my kids in more of a batching form of delivery, right? Which is this traditional industrial model. Candidly, our public institutions, most of our public district schools and most of our private schools still, they look a lot like they did, in that mid 20th century, right? They're still putting kids in seats and they're sitting there by the day they were born and batching them through. Moreover, the pressures we're seeing with technology and expenses of higher ed have now put additional pressures on these existing schools, right? So we're seeing this particularly with small private schools all over the country. They're just in a crunch. They can't charge enough to actually make their operations work, right? And they can't get their enrollment high enough to actually bring in the revenue to drive growth, right? And so we're seeing, literally hundreds, if not, hundreds of these private schools around the country on the brink of challenge because they're in that sort of operational dead zone, right? They don't have the numbers to actually drive revenue and drive growth. And so what we're seeing is this really interesting time in education, Mitchell, where almost all of the growth that we're seeing is in these alternative forms of delivery, homeschooling, microschooling, alternative delivery, private education, right? And the supply continues to be low, but we've got a lot of schools out there saying, what do we do with this? Do we adapt? Do we change? Do we innovate? Do we change our models? And so this is sort of where Soaring has kind of come into the mix to try to help people navigate this challenge, right? How do we grow? How do we transform? How do we sustain in an ever-changing kind of evolving educational landscape?
Man, and I love the microschool model. You've mentioned that a couple times, and I see that they're popping up kind of everywhere. And I kind of touch on the microschool a little bit because I think there's probably some listeners that maybe have heard the model, but don't maybe know fully what that is. If you were to kind of describe what specifically a microschool is, what is that for you guys?
Yeah, and I want to be really clear. I mean, microschools are so new still, and I think defining them is even kind of squishy, right? They're hard to get your hand on because they range from what I would call the traditional teacher learning pods or parent pods, which became more popular during COVID, right? Which is a group of parents huddling together to share the duties to educate their own kids, all the way to now what we're seeing are the emergence of full day, 5-day week, intentionally small schools and everything in between. And so I would define microschools as again, they're characterized generally by small enrollments, highly personalized learning models, right? And so they're really focused on how do I take this child and wrap around that child and create an educational experience that's going to make that's really going to be tuned up for that kid, right? And then they usually are characterized by they can scale into really unique spaces, right? And so a home, a business, a church, where traditional schools just can't go. They can go to places where traditional schools can't go. But I would say that they run the gamut of kind of ranging from homeschooling all the way to private or public schools that are aimed at 5-day a week offerings and everything in between. I'll just say this. I want to add this, Mitchell. These things are not without challenge. I mean, they're exciting to talk about, and there's some really neat stories being told all over the country. If you Google microschools, if you read some of the articles, incredible, I think, potential here. But we have a long way to go to really understand how to make these things work and make them sustainable. And how do we fit these alternative delivery models into sort of the traditional ecosystem, right? So I think there's a lot of tensions there that are healthy, right? And that we want to continue to wrestle with. So I hold a lot of energy and excitement and for the micro schooling in general, but also some fully recognizing that we've got a lot of work to do to really understand how to make these things work.
Yeah, and I think I've heard it two different ways. You got micro school, and then you got the one room schoolhouse model. I hear people call it that way, and I actually like my wife and I love that model. We'll probably end up doing something like that with our son when he's only 3 like right now, but we want him around kids, so we want to homeschool. I was homeschooled my whole life, and so I never went to school, and I love that model. Grew up in the 90s, so that was back when it wasn't super common. I remember people would see me out in the store and they go, literally, why aren't you in school? They would come up to me, and I'm
Yeah.
like this 10-year-old kid. I'm like, or 9, I was like, gosh, 8 probably. And I go, I was homeschooled. Like they didn't know what the heck
Almost
that
like a
was.
renegade back then, right? It was almost like homeschooling. You were a renegade. Now it's more common. We all know people who homeschool now, right? So
Yeah, especially after COVID, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, homeschooling. It's like when people work from home, like, oh, okay, you work from home, cool. But yeah, I love that the model, and I want it to be more prevalent out there, just because these people, they have a heart for starting a school that I've talked to, and they're like, they think they need millions of dollars to start the school. Oh, we got to buy a building, build a building, or whatever. Like, man, like I've known people I know a lady right now. She's working on starting a Christian school, and she's doing it with $10,000 to start the school, and she knows, she's like, I know it's not a lot, I know it's not enough, but we're like getting it off the ground to launch this fall, and have like their goal is, I think, 10 students or 12 students to just start the school, and start somewhere. And I'm like, how cool is that? I mean, you don't have to have these millions of dollars, and it's just a cool model. I just really enjoy it because most of them, at least I've talked to, and maybe it's different from where you've come across, is it's mixed grades, it's mixed ages in a room. So like the one my wife and I were looking at that I love the model was 5-year-olds to 12-year-olds in one room, like 15 students, 18 students, or whatever it was, working together and learning together. And people I know will go, well, how does that work? But they're all working on different things, and the teacher's guiding them and helping them when they get stuck on something. And seeing it in action is really cool. It's just I think as Americans, we have a hard time with different ways of education because we're very much like, well, this is how it's been, and if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But I think most people will agree there's lots of broken pieces of the education system that need to be fixed, and there's more than more than one way or two ways to skin a cat, whatever they say. Horrible saying, but I kind of see it like that. There's so many ways to do education now, and I love it. So I love what you're doing on that piece.
yeah, I think homeschooling they were the early innovators in this, right? I mean, the idea back when you and your family were, you know, uh, educating at home, and I use that term in jest, renegades, but just to signal that, yeah, there wasn't that many people out there doing that, right? But that movement's gained a lot of steam, and I think microschooling is almost the next iteration of that. Is how do we take the ultimate microschool, kind of the homeschool family, right, and scale the beauty of that, right? The independence, the freedom, the personalization, right, that can come with homeschooling if done well, right? The wonder and joy that you can experience in the educational process, and create an environment in a group setting that really expresses those things, and that's one of the most exciting things. And when you look at some of these models that are emerging in the hybrid school homeschooling space or the other types of micro schools, that what you're describing is what gets me all excited about it. When you see these things in action, you see these children, these families saying, listen, this is what we've been missing, right? This is breaking some paradigms for us that needed to be broken, right? This is bringing joy and connection back. And it's actually a love of learning perhaps that can come back in the right setting. Again, not for everybody, right? We believe, and I believe that a thriving community is a diverse ecosystem of options for families, right? Public, charter, private, microschooling, homeschooling, and really putting the power back in the hands of the parents to say, hey, I'm the primary educator of my kiddos. How do I want to express my values through my child's education? And that's what really gets me excited, is to see these options now emerge for more families and more communities.
Love it. Well, and we kind of talked about some challenges, and we even already mentioned some things that are going good in the education space. Well, let's talk about what's going good. What have you seen some schools doing? What have maybe you guys come beside and have helped schools do? Any cool wins that you'd love to share about some schools?
Well, I think there's so many exciting things happening, and it's an incredible blessing to be in the position that I'm in, where sort of on the front lines, getting to work with operators, people who are these moms, the dads, the churches, the business owners who are saying, hey, there's a need in my community and I want to stand up and do something about it. I want to start a school. And so I really get to, we get to work with them from the point of, hey, I just have an idea to now kids are actually walking into the door. And so what joy, that provides us to be able to be a part of that process too. But I would say to highlight a couple really neat opportunities or wins that we're seeing. One is the building on the micro school conversation, the opportunities that these new alternative delivery models present to bring schools to communities that never would have had them before, right? And I would highlight our rural and urban communities in particular. We're working on a couple of rural projects in South Dakota, for example, right now. And you think South Dakota, well, South Dakota, you have your public district school. That's pretty much it, right? If you're in a small town. But there's still a lot of families who are saying, listen, we want a different option. We want another delivery method in our model. Well, enter microschooling. To the comment you made earlier, you don't need $3 million in startup funding. I don't need to build a building, right? I don't need a critical mass of about 5,000 students to be able to draw from, right? To generate enough enrollment to make it work. We can do it for 10 grand and a couple of families, right? To get the thing started. So just seeing the opportunities emerge for some of these operators and seeing their eyes light up to say, oh my goodness, we can actually do this. And we can create opportunities, albeit for a smaller number of families to get started. In our case, Christian education is really powerful. I think it's really amazing, right? And I think that the broader opportunity that we're seeing is kind of the removal of going back to this one-room schoolhouse concept and I would say a renewed focus on personalized learning, which is happening in our traditional models too, by the way. It's not just in our, these new microschooling models or personalized learning models. Is really kind of the removing of time and place is the key driver of learning in any of our schools, right? When we decided that time and place were the key levers for learning, right? You're sitting in this seat at this particular time. That means you learned, right? We really instantly kind of removed a lot of kids from the learning process, right? Because kids don't learn that way, right? Is a lot of these schools now are embracing mastery and as their key kind of driver of learning. And for me, that's just an exciting development in education. My hope, my prayer is that we'll continue to see more and more schools figure out ways to leverage things like competency and mastery as the key mechanisms for learning. And what the results I think we're going to continue to see, what we're seeing it, in smaller scale now, but I think what we can see at scale later is we're going to see greater skill development in kiddos. We're going to see greater joy as kids move into those grade school years, right? And we're going to see, I think, a better sort of earlier connection in workforce development, right? Where we're going to see kids who are gravitating towards key skills, strengths that are inherently in them, right? And that will then again better generate workers for an ever-changing dynamic workforce. So those are some things that are really exciting that we're seeing.
That is super exciting. And how do you guys, as a school, or as you come across schools who are starting up, how does your organization come beside them and help them? Is it just kind of like on the coaching and consulting side? Like, how are you helping these schools?
Yeah, we really are. We're coaches, and we stand on the sideline with the playbook and the clipboard, and we call the plays. But we want to make sure our operators, our teams on the ground, whether it be a church or a founding team, that they're running the place, right? And they're doing the work as well. But we've landed there because we think it's the best model for us. And the way it looks is we have a multi-step process. We've launched a lot of schools at Open Sky Education, right? We've been doing this for 20 years. We've launched charter schools and private schools. So we took this playbook that we built for over 2 decades, and now we've translated that into a process and a structure to help others do it too, right? And we coach them through that process. We do it virtually, so we want to keep this as affordable as possible, right? It's not coursework, right? So it's not an independent project that these folks are doing, but it involves some project management as well. So we keep you kind of moving forward, right? Hey, we've got agreed upon timelines here. We got to keep moving. Every team is different and they require different types of input and motivation and information. But I think we're excited. To date, we've had about 20 school projects in the last 2 years that are in some phase, right, of their school launch process that have partnered with us to help them, take action on their dreams of starting a new Christian school.
Awesome. That's exciting. And if people, before I get to my last question for you today, if people want to get in contact with you, Jack, to like work with you guys or find out what you're doing, what's the best way to do that?
SoaringEducation.org is the best place to go. Got all our information there. And we're launching a new kind of micro school information hub there too, for those that are interested in learning more about microschooling and if that's a solution for folks in your community. And you can fill out an interest form there. We'll get back to you right away. We'd love to just hear more about your stories and how God's moving and leading, in your community as well.
Awesome. So as we look to wrap it up, always end with the final same question. If you were to share a piece of advice, which you will share a piece of advice, but if you share a piece of advice with those listening, what would that piece of advice be, Jack?
Yeah, I think for me, it's about really holding tightly to kind of our mission as organizations and start to hold a little more loosely to the tactics. I think, we're in a really interesting time in education where it's being squeezed. And I think we could just ignore it and hold tightly to, no, this is the way we've always done it. We're always going to do it this way. Mm-hmm. Or we can look and see what's happening and see, as I started the call talking about this idea that more and more parents every year are seeking personalized matching forms of delivery for their kids. So if I'm an existing school leader today, I would recommend that you really start to think critically about how do we create more opportunities for families to partner with you, and what does that look like? And does that mean new delivery models, new school launches? Does it mean recognizing and opening up opportunities for homeschool families or hybrid school, families? The reality is they're coming to your community and they're already there, right? And in the Christian education space, there's likely demand for what you have to offer in that space. So hold tightly to your mission, but let's start to hold a little more loosely to our tactics and open up more opportunities to reach more families in our communities.
Love it. Jack, thank you for giving time today. I'm glad we were finally able to connect on this one. And thank you for all these years of pouring into startup schools and new schools that are going. And I'm wishing you guys nothing but the best as you continue to do exactly what you're doing right now. And I'm hoping I can send some schools your way that need some help. So just thank you again for your time today. I appreciate it.
Likewise, man. Mitchell. Certainly great to connect with you again. Thanks for the opportunity.
Well, another huge shout out and a thank you to Jack for taking time and being on the podcast today. I love what he's doing to help schools, specifically those startup schools. So if you're one of those, I want you to reach out to him. He's a great guy that's doing some amazing things for Christian startup schools. So Jack, wishing you nothing but the best as you continue to do what you're doing, my friend. And if you're a school that's listening and you need some community in your life in this world, please join our private Facebook community called School Success Makers. Of course, it's on Facebook, private community just for school leaders called School Success Makers. I'm personally in there and I'd love to see you in there as well. Please check out our website as well. It's schoolsuccessmakers.com. That's schoolsuccessmakers.com. We are launching an amazing newsletter this fall that I want you guys to go ahead and get signed up for so you don't miss it. It's going to be called the School Success Report. It's going to have some different news articles. We're going to do some giveaways. We're going to do some highlights, shout outs. It's going to be a really fun newsletter. The team's already been working on it for a few months now, so we want to make sure we have a really cool launch. So if you want that, please go to our site so you can sign up for the School Success Report that launches this fall. We have some really cool stuff we're working on for you guys, as I've talked about for a while, so please get connected with us and make sure you don't miss out on anything. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns, or ideas, please reach out to us so we can always make this podcast better. We love your 5-star reviews, so please keep them coming because it helps us be able to create more content for you guys, because that is what we are here for. And of course, if you guys are in a position where you're like, man, really struggling to grow your enrollment and needing help to grow, you can check out our partner, which is, of course, the company that I own, SlaterStrategies.com. That's SlaterStrategies.com. And we'd love to work with your school to help you grow your enrollment and find ways for you guys to get some new families in your school this fall. So if you have questions, let us know, and we will be back here next week with another awesome guest as usual on the School Success Podcast. We'll see you then.